Maxim and his friends Dima, Katya and Oleg were driving a car along a country road. Their goal was simple, to find a mysterious abandoned town that was the stuff of legends. They say it's been erased from the map, Dima said, looking at his phone. Officially it doesn't exist. But there must be ruins there, right? Katya asked. According to rumors, there aren't. Everyone who goes there doesn't come back. Maxim grinned. It's nonsense, just another scare story for tourists. But when they turned onto the old road leading to the city, something changed. The GPS stopped working. The car stalled. And up ahead, amidst the fog, there was a sign that said, "Welcome to Novograd." But neither of them knew such a town. The guys got out of the car. The road disappeared, Katya whispered, looking back. They turned around. Behind them there was no longer the road they had come on. Is this a prank? Oleg chuckled nervously. There was silence in response. The town looked empty. Broken windows, weathered walls, but no sign of time. As if it had been left only yesterday. Dima was the first to step inside the city. We should find out what was going on here. But they didn't notice they were being watched. From the windows, from the back alleys. In the darkness, something was moving. There was a fire bell in the center of town. Maxim touched it with his hand, and suddenly it rang. What are you doing? Katya shrieked. But Maxim didn't listen to her. The city came to life. Doors began to open. Lanterns lit up. Whispers could be heard in the distance. Why did you come? Who called you? Go away, before it's too late. Who said that? Oleg shouted. There's someone here. Dima frantically pulled out his cell phone, but the screen was black. Maxim looked at the sign at the entrance to the city. It now read, "You came at the call of blood. Now you will stay here, forever." And at that moment, something came out of the alley. Maxim froze, looking at the figure that came out of the alley. It looked human, but it was too tall, too thin. Its face was hidden by a dirty bandage, and its clothes were dark with dried stains. "Who are you?" Katya asked in a trembling voice. The figure didn't answer. It simply pointed to the bell that had rung a moment ago. And then the city began to change. Windows slammed shut. Houses began to move as if breathing. A piercing scream came from somewhere above. Maxim grabbed Katya's arm. "Run!" The boys rushed back to the car. But when they reached the place where they had left it, the car was gone. There was no road. Just endless streets going into the darkness. Shit, shit, shit. Dima grabbed his head in panic. We're trapped here. Oleg looked around in horror. This city is alive. Maxim looked up. Something was crawling on the roofs of the buildings. Silhouettes. Dozens of them. Skeleton-like bodies with blank faces. They were staring at them. And then one of them jumped down. The creature collapsed right in front of the boys. Its head was wrapped in bandages, but blood oozed from underneath. It tore its mouth open in an unnatural smile and hissed. You came at the call, and it came at them. Maxim was the first to hit it on the head, but it didn't react. Dima grabbed an iron bar and plunged it into the creature's chest. It froze. Then it laughed out loud. Blood, calling. And its laughter echoed throughout the city. Others started jumping off the rooftops. The boys ran. But now they knew the city would not let them go alive. Maxim and his friends ran, barely breathing. Behind them they heard mocking, hoarse laughter, approaching footsteps and the scraping of bones on the asphalt. Katya stumbled, but Maxim grabbed her arm. Hold on, he shouted, looking back. The creatures were catching up with them. Their movements were unnaturally fast. Their bodies were disfigured, and their faces, they had no faces. Dima pointed to an old hotel. Inside, they burst into the building, slammed the door shut and barricaded it with cabinets. Scratching noises were heard outside. The creatures weren't breaking in. They were waiting. Katya breathed heavily, huddled against the wall. They're playing with us. Inside, the hotel was covered in a thick layer of dust. But there was a fresh bell on the receptionist's desk. Maxim picked it up. Welcome, sounded a quiet voice behind him. The guys froze. Behind the counter stood an old man. but his skin was unnaturally gray, and his eyes were black as night. "You're late," he smiled with rotten teeth. "They already know you're here." "Who they?" Oleg shouted. The old man tilted his head slowly. "The townspeople." There was a rumble of thunder. The door shattered, and the creatures began to crawl inside. They crawled along the walls, the ceiling, the floor. Maxim grabbed Katya. Dima picked up the iron bar. "There's nowhere to run," the old man wheezed, grinning. "You are already part of the city." At that moment, one of the creatures pounced on Oleg. There was a crunch of bones. Katya screamed. Maxim struck the creature, but it was too late. Oleg was dragged away into the darkness. And then his last death scream came from the corridor. The boys looked at each other. They knew that no one would get out of here alive. But Maxim wasn't going to give up. "If the city calls for blood, then it will have to swallow my last one." Maxim, Katya, and Dima huddled in a corner of the dark hotel. Oleg had been dragged away into the darkness, and now the sounds of crunching bones and gurgling blows came from the depths of the corridors. Katya was crying. Dima was clutching a bloody iron bar. "We must find a way out before it's too late," Maxim whispered. "There is no way out," said the old man behind the counter. His voice changed. They looked at him and froze with horror. The old man's skin began to slip away, revealing black meat and empty eye sockets. He smiled broadly. "You are the last people the city will accept." And at that moment, the creatures rushed at them. Dima struck one of the monsters, but his hand was grabbed by bony fingers. "Dima!" Katya screamed. But Maxim already knew he could not be saved. The creature tore him apart. Blood spurted onto the floor, and the city came to life even more. Maxim grabbed Katya's hands. "Run!" They rushed down the corridor, feeling the breath of the dead behind them. But the walls began to move, squeezing the passage. The city wanted to keep them here. And then Maxim realized it was necessary to finish the ritual. They ran out into the square. The bell was still there. "He's the one who locked us in," Katya shouted. Maxim grabbed a piece of rebar. "We must break it." But as soon as he took the first step, the city spoke. "Give it to us and you'll be gone." Maxim froze. Katya stared at him, gasping. "No, you don't." He couldn't do that. But if he didn't make the sacrifice, they would both stay here. Katya took a step back. "Maxim, please." Behind her back, the creatures were approaching. Maxim lowered the armature. "I'm sorry," and pushed her into the crowd of the dead. Katya screamed. The creatures tore her to pieces. The city fell silent. The bell fell. The square began to fall into the void. Maxim ran. He didn't turn back. Survived, but not saved. He ran out onto the highway. The city was gone. Only an empty forest remained. A car drove by. The driver stopped. "Dude, where are you from? There are no roads here at all." Maxim couldn't answer. But when he looked into the reflection of the car, he saw the silhouettes of his friends behind him. They were smiling. And in the distance he heard the whisper of the town. "You're ours now. We're coming for you." Maxim sat on the curb, not believing he had gotten out. The driver, an older man, opened the door. "Hey, kid, you okay?" Maxim slowly raised his head. "I'm from Novograd." The man frowned. "What city?" Maxim looked back. Where there had been a black, dead city just a moment ago, there was now an ordinary wasteland. Novograd no longer existed. On the way to the city, the driver questioned Maxim, but he could not explain what had happened. How to tell about a city that didn't exist? How to say that he had betrayed his friends for a life? How to explain that he could see their faces outside the car window? Katya, Dima, Oleg. They stood along the road. Maxim closed his eyes. But then he heard Katya's voice. "You're ours now. You didn't leave us behind. You've just become part of the city." He squirmed in his seat. "Stop the car." The driver slowed down. "Are you all right?" Maxim opened the door and ran out. His hometown could be seen in the distance. He needed to go home, just to forget everything. But when he entered his apartment, they were already waiting for him. In the bathroom mirror he saw Katya. Her body was torn. Her eyes were staring straight at him. "Maxim," she whispered. He closed his eyes. You are gone. Neither are you. He turned around. On the wall, a trembling, bloody inscription was scratched out. The city awaits you. And that's when the bell rang. D-Z-Z-Z-Z-Z-Z-Z-Z-Z-Z-Z-Z-Z-Z-Z-Z-Z. Maxim shouted. He had not left the city. The city had gone after him. Maxim stood in front of the mirror. Katya smiled at him from the reflection. Her body was mutilated, her skin torn, and darkness splashed in her empty eyes. Maxim, you know we didn't leave, don't you? He recoiled. Go away, you're dead. Katya laughed. And you're not? The bell rang. Jingle, 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 jingle. The walls of the room cracked. Maxim clutched his head. This can't be happening. I got out. Do you think the city is a place? Katya whispered. She stepped out of the mirror. The city is you. Maxim ran out of the apartment. But as he sprinted out into the street, the world changed. The houses curled up into unreal shapes. The people on the streets were empty shells. They stood without moving. Cars didn't drive. The wind didn't blow. What is this? Maxim shouted. Katya followed him, slowly, confidently. It's a city, your city. Maxim realized the truth. He had never left Novograd. Novograd had swallowed him up. Maxim ran, trying to find a way out. But the streets went in circles. He found himself in front of the same sign again. Welcome to Novograd. Katya came closer. You understand, don't you? We're not dead. You're not alive. Maxim flinched. In his pocket he found his cell phone. The latest camera footage. He pressed play. His face was on the screen. But his skin was black, dried out. His eyes were empty. And he heard his voice. I am part of the city. The city is me. Maxim shouted. Katya smiled. Behind her back stood Dima and Oleg. All three of them whispered at the same time. Welcome home. And then the city accepted him finally. Maxim stopped screaming. Katya, Dima and Oleg stood in front of him, their faces lifeless, but darkness dancing in their eyes. You're one of us now, Katya whispered. Maxim looked back. The city had not disappeared. It had become a part of him. He could feel every street, every shadow, every soul that had ever gotten here. He knew they had always been here. Welcome home. This is the city, he mumbled. Katya smiled. You're not the first, and you won't be the last. Dima and Oleg laughed. The city was calling for new guests. In the distance they heard the sound of a car. Someone is coming, Oleg said. Someone new, Dima added. Maxim closed his eyes. And when he opened them, he was no longer himself. Now he was waiting. The city always waits.